All right. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. I know it's everybody's lunch hour. We really appreciate it. And welcome to the first 2025 Lunch and Learn webinar in support of Edmonton's Housing Month. My name is Violet and I'm with HomeEd, and we're so excited to be able to have the opportunity to be one of the first presenters to kick off this series of webinars. The Edmonton Housing Month, for those who aren't familiar or aren't very familiar, the initiative really aims to raise awareness of housing challenges, the housing efforts in the sector, and most importantly, potential solutions to these issues. We also want to acknowledge the important work that's being done in our community and provide information and resources that can increase the social literacy on homelessness and its related challenges. Can you switch the slide for me, Jonathan? Thank you. Before we dive in, we'd like to take the time to recognize that we are gathered on Treaty 6 territory here in Edmonton, home to the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, and many others, and to acknowledge the importance of this treaty as well as our responsibility to these communities in supporting and helping to create necessary social change. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to quickly review the process of this webinar. So I'm going to be handing it over to Jonathan in a moment here. If you have any questions, if you look down into the bottom right of your screen, you'll see a little box kind of made up by 3 by 3 of circles. Under that, there's a Q&A function. If you have any questions, you can just pop your questions into that Q&A. We'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. Of course, time allowing, so we'll see how it goes. And I'm going to hand you over to HomeEd's VP of Projects, Jonathan Lay, to talk about the lessons that we've learned in our major energy retrofits.
Yeah, thank you so much, Violet. So HomeEd is not a stranger to renovations. We have a portfolio of over 1,200 units spread across the city of Edmonton. But retrofits are a little bit different. So we're going to go through a bit of a background around retrofits. Some of you will already be familiar with that, but you'll particularly be interested in some of the considerations and lessons learned. And we'll spend the end of the program looking at 2 specific case studies. So if a retrofit is a new term for you, it's a little bit different than a standard renovation where we might be turning over a unit, upgrading anything from carpet to windows. But energy retrofits are really designed to lower the energy intensity of a building. So some things obviously come to mind from your own homes. If you upgrade the windows or furnaces or high efficiency appliances, obviously that will reduce the energy that your home requires. And a retrofit is doing that at scale across a larger building or group of buildings. So what's included? This isn't a comprehensive list, but it is a pretty big highlight reel. So there's work that we can do to the outside of a building, increasing the insulation, either in the walls, on the outside of the walls, in attic spaces, upgrading doors, windows, sealing building penetrations. Mechanical systems are a big one as well. We have heating systems and cooling systems in our buildings for air and water. We have heat recovery systems that we can install, low flow fixtures. Although that reduces the water consumption, when the low flow fixture also has hot water going through it, it reduces our energy consumption. And building control systems. Electrical system upgrades include things like solar panels, switching to LED lighting, and then appliances. Dryers, dishwashers, refrigerators are particularly energy intensive and benefit from modernization if they're quite old in a building. Now, going through this list, some of these items are easier to do. Some are less expensive to do. Some are less intrusive to do versus others. So for example, with envelope and upgrades, sealing building penetrations, like upgrading weather stripping, caulking around openings, is a pretty low cost option. Replacing an entire building envelope with new insulation is pretty disruptive and high cost. So there's the full gamut for easier items and more intensive items across this list. So why do it? Well, the obvious answer might be, well, bring your utility costs down. That's true. You can lower the cost of your utilities for gas, electricity, and water. And as many of the affordable housing providers who are on here know, utility bills are one of our largest operating costs. So anything we can do to bring those down is good. But there are other benefits too, particularly for tenants who are occupying the space. Things like installing ERVs can improve the air quality and comfort in a space. The same with upgrades to windows, doors, or ceiling building penetrations that will make rooms less drafty or less susceptible to heating in the summertime or being cold in the winter. And new appliances are generally welcomed by tenants, especially if they've been using appliances that are quite aged. And in some cases, if the energy retrofit also includes the installation of a heat pump, it might come along with air conditioning for the unit, which, as summers have been getting warmer, is appreciated by tenants. The picture, as an aside, is one of our recently retrofitted attics. It's a townhome attic with a spray foam layer underneath and then a blown-in insulation layer above. So those are benefits to the tenants. But what about operators? Well, we can have lower utility costs too, particularly in apartment buildings. But major retrofits, especially ones that touch major building components, can improve the building's longevity and even recapitalize the asset, which can have benefits for lending and other outcomes as you're trying to refinance your portfolio. One of the other things that can happen with doing a retrofit, particularly if there's improved control systems in boiler rooms and things like that, is you can have better building system management, even remote management, to reduce some of your operating costs and operating time. Okay, so that's the reasons why, but it's not perfect. There's a lot to think about before undertaking something like a retrofit. And in our world, it starts with the tenants. Construction is disruptive. When we're doing major work inside a tenant's unit, and that can be anything from changing out a window or an appliance to installing a new ERV system with bulkheads and new equipment. It's pretty disruptive, and external renovations are particularly long. Can cause the loss of balconies and other outdoor spaces. Large-scale construction also typically requires staging, and that can come with the loss of parking stalls. And when you're turning on and off building systems to upgrade them, power and water cycling can also be disruptive to tenants. They all sometimes have to learn to operate new systems too. Buildings that have really old thermostats, when the systems are modernized, might have to go to a new thermostat. It's a new system to use. There's could be new filters, for example, in the case of an ERV or HRV that's installed in a unit for heat recovery ventilation or energy recovery ventilation, that might have a filter that a building operator requires a tenant to replace if they don't do it themselves. Doing a retrofit that has those kinds of components or improves the building's ceiling can also come with an unexpected side effect, which is ventilation changes. So it's great that the building's less drafty in the winter, but that can also mean that heat builds up more during the summer. And for new kinds of equipment that have limitations on how much heat that they can produce, maintaining very high temperatures in buildings that some tenants find desirable can be difficult. Switching out appliances to become more energy efficient also comes with trade-offs. So for example, some stovetops don't work with certain kinds of pots and pans, and so tenants may have to replace those. Self-vented dryers, range hoods, microwaves, they also come with trade-offs and maybe additional filters to change or clean. And then low flow fixtures can change the amount of water that tenants are expecting out of faucets. One big change too, this is especially true in our market with the installation of solar, is a changeover to sub-metering. So because of how power is regulated here in Alberta, we can only produce as much power as a building consumes. But if the consumption is metered separately for individual tenants, as is common where we live, then the building itself may not produce nearly as much power that's on the operator's meter as the solar that could be installed on the roof to do a large-scale energy retrofit. And so to make up that difference, the tenants have to be switched to a sub-meter system from their regular retailer. That provides some new complications in terms of their energy relationships and the relationship they have with their operator, particularly in a regulated rental rate environment. There's also impacts for operators, though. All of those tenant impacts come with tenant management considerations during construction related to disruption, and then after the fact, training, compliance, and tenant satisfaction with new systems. That's true of tenants who are already there through the process, as well as tenants who are moving into retrofitted units that might have systems that, even years down the road, they need to be educated on if they haven't encountered them before. Operators also will have new systems to look after. So that could be new building control systems, in-unit ERVs or building ERVs, filter exchanges. If they're going to commercial style units, they might have new third-party maintenance requirements. They could have redundant systems. For example, if they have a heat pump system that is serving most of the year and they have a separate heating system that's serving for extreme cold weather, then there's two systems to maintain instead of just one. If an operator is used to using older hot water tanks, for example, and upgrades to a new style of on-demand hot water or even heat pump hot water tanks, there's new things to stock. And that's true of a lot of these retrofits, even for LED lights or other appliances. So stock changeover, purchasing them, replacing them are all considerations. One thing that is important to note too is that retrofits can create a really interesting financial misalignment. And by that, what we mean is that the financial benefits of a retrofit, like the lower utility costs, in apartments in Edmonton, the utility costs are generally borne primarily by the building operator. And so the cost of the retrofit is incurred by the building operator, but the financial benefit from the lower utility costs flows through back to the building operator. So there's good financial alignment there. But in the case of many townhomes, the metering is generally directly to the tenant. The tenants are paying the utilities, which means that the financial investment made by the building operator to reduce the overall energy consumption of the building creates a financial benefit to the tenant. That's not a bad thing, but what it means is there's a misalignment between who's putting up the cost and who's achieving the benefit. And so it's an important consideration in designing the capital flow over time for those units as an operator. And then the same changes with sub-metering and utility relationships, or even bi-directional meters, is true of our tenants and true of building operators, and then managing the tenants through that process, and also managing the relationship with a new third-party utility provider. And that really locks you in on a long-term, very, very long-term contract with sub-metering. So there's lots of reasons to do them. There's lots of things to think about when we do them. But then the question always comes up, how do we pay for them? Well, in our context here in Edmonton, most providers have access to AHIP. They have a dedicated rehabilitation stream through the city of Edmonton. The province of Alberta has AHPP, and they have a dedicated renovation stream. And then, of course, our friends at CMHC, who do a lot of the funding in this space, have a dedicated repair and renewal stream. There are lots of other sources of capital, though, for retrofits. Some are really specific to utility reduction. So, for example, the city of Edmonton's recently had a solar panel grant for multifamily residential housing providers. That was much smaller in scale. The federal government, sometimes through different departments, will run similar programs. And then there are other granting agencies like the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and others that may provide support through for retrofitting as well. Just depends on what sources of capital you have access to. So let's look at a couple of specific examples. We're going to start with a portfolio-wide retrofit. So as I mentioned at the start of our presentation, HomeEd has just over 1,200 units right now across Edmonton. And this year we've undertaken a major retrofit on about 90% of our portfolio, almost 1,100 units. That's work we're extremely proud of. It's almost a $23 million investment into our portfolio. And we've taken on a lot, from attic insulation and appliances to furnaces and hot water tanks. We've installed rainwater recovery, solar panels. We've updated building control systems and makeup air units in some of our buildings, switched over to LED lighting, and then installed low flow fixtures. This isn't a comprehensive list, but it's a good highlight reel of what we've accomplished. What you're seeing in the picture here is a solar array installation on the roof of one of our apartment buildings in Northeast Edmonton. So what have we learned so far doing that? We're just wrapping up this project now. The vast majority of the work is going to be complete by the end of the month. And repairing, retrofitting, renovating old buildings is hard. And sometimes things don't fit. When you're taking on something at this scale, we spec across our entire portfolio, and sometimes our tradespeople got into, in a couple of situations, mechanical rooms in some of our older townhomes, and there just isn't enough physical space in the mechanical room to install new equipment because it's just not code compliant due to the physical space available. One of the other things that we've appreciated and we've done a very good job on is our tenant management through this process. Obviously, some of these scopes are pretty disruptive. And to minimize the impact, we've made the choice in 2 buildings not to install ERVs. And we switched that out with solar installations to have less impact at some of our properties. And then the attic insulation, rather than going through attic hatches, we access primarily through the gables. That would have been one of our largest disruptions to tenants, and the gable installation meant that we could do the work with the tenants still in their units without any significant disruption besides the sound of some footsteps over top of them. The thing that we tried to do as we were working through the retrofit, and this is a real value add for any operator that's dealing with old buildings, is old buildings have lots of work to do on them. And where we could, we try to prioritize retrofits that would allow us to accomplish, as part of that work, some other upgrade. So for example, one of our townhome complexes, we needed to replace the roof anyways. That was time to be done. And there was no funding directly for a roof replacement. But if we funded the solar panels, then we don't put solar panels on old roofs. We have to replace the roof. And then that roof replacement becomes part of the capital that goes into achieving the solar panel outcome. Managing those kinds of impacts between us and our tenants to make sure we had good financial alignment on the outcomes was also a consideration. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of through this project is the communication system that we used. So we notified tenants when we were starting projects, and as tenants moved in, because it's run over the course of a year, they've been brought up to speed as well. But then a month before, 2 weeks before, a week before, and then obviously our regulatory notice 24 hours before, has allowed tenants to stay up to speed with where we're at, when we're coming, and set expectations around that. Combining that with trying to be as minimally invasive into their space as possible has meant that doing this kind of scale of work across about 1,100 units, we haven't had a lot for complaints. And that's something that we're really proud of, because it's hard to do this kind of work around tenants. This project, our second case study, is an entirely different thing. Now, it's also a retrofit, but at the previous one, we're trying to reduce our portfolio energy consumption by about 25%. That's significant. But here at Miller Ridge in Northeast Edmonton, we're in the process of reducing it by 70%. You can appreciate that trying to accomplish that is a much, much more significant undertaking. This is 122 units, and it's a full new building envelope. New attic insulation, new boilers, new windows and doors, in-unit ERV, solar on the roof, comes with electrical distribution, sub-metering upgrades, new appliances. It's a $9.5 million investment just into this property. So we're about 30% of the way through, but along the way, we've completed or are well into every major upgrade to be done. And we've learned a lot along the way. So it goes without saying that when you're doing renovations, you're going to find things when you open walls. And in our case, also materials that we had planned to reuse that would be taken off the building and then reinstalled just weren't suitable for reinstallation. Like with our other mechanical spaces, sometimes things don't fit. And a building, in this case, that wasn't designed to be sub-metered, needs space for sub-metering equipment, needs space for solar inverters, and those weren't designed into the original mechanical rooms. And so those are issues that we're actively navigating. One of the other things that came up with this particular renovation is an appreciation that our lease agreements also didn't anticipate this kind of change to our building. And so when we've encountered issues around parking management with tenants and just entitlement to stalls and their reallocation, as well as sub-metering and just overall impact from construction disruption. So those are things that we're actively working on and have made some changes to our scheduling to accommodate as we change over our leases. Along with that, tenant management. Obviously, this is a majorly disruptive renovation, much more so than our portfolio-wide energy retrofit. And so we've had to contemplate things like rent incentives, especially when we take away access to spaces like balconies for an extended period of time. One of the surprises to me, and it's an important thing that we've learned with this project, is the importance of communication, absolutely, but don't overwhelm tenants with communication. The system that we use for a portfolio-wide retrofit with a month, 2 weeks, 1 week, and then 24 hours, at the scale of this kind of invasive and intensive retrofit, where we're in and out of their units so much, trying to maintain that schedule with the notices becomes very overwhelming. And so we've actually had to scale back how many notices we're providing for them, focusing instead on in-person events, on notice boards, and then on other regular notifications, but that don't have that exact same cadence. So we're keeping them up to date. The communication is important, but trying to balance that so they don't become overwhelmed. So that takes us to our Q&A portion. We have about 10 minutes for that. So as Violet noted at the start of the presentation, if you have questions, please use the 9-dot grid at the bottom to select the Q&A, and then you can ask your questions on there. The question I have from Ada is, did you encounter differences in complexity or cost between retrofitting apartment complexes versus townhome units, and how did you manage those variances? Yeah, that's a really good question. They are quite a bit different, and mostly comes down to the building systems. The townhomes tend to have more conventional residential systems, furnaces, hot water tanks, the kind of thing that we have in single-family homes. Whereas apartments have larger scale commercial systems, things like boilers and building control systems. So they're more complex by their nature, for sure. But a lot of the similarities around tenant management and tenant disruption and system cycling are true for both properties. And so a lot of the same approaches apply. One big difference, as mentioned, though, is just that financial alignment, making choices in each building to balance out financial outcomes for tenants versus financial outcomes for the operator. Our next question, how is the case study number 2 into the process of completion? I think it means how far. So we're about 30% complete right now. We're actually ahead of schedule. We're well along with that. We have our boiler replacement coming up. That will be a fairly significant item. As you saw in the picture with scaffolding around the building, the entire building exterior now has been removed, and the membrane installation is being completed right now. And we've already started the exterior insulation. Attic insulation is complete. Solar panels are up. The longest term item on that renovation is going to be our switch over to sub-metering for our tenants, just because of the disruption and the need for us to update some of our leases. So that will be happening over the period of the next number of months. A question from Marcus. How has the cost of retrofit technology shifted over the last few years? Do you see the cost coming down as technology improves and wider adoption occurs? It's a great question, Marcus. In some cases, the answer is yes. So, like for example, solar panels continue to come down in cost relative to the amount of power that they produce. Things like LED lighting have become standard. Low flow fixtures are standard. High efficiency appliances are standard. These are all off the shelf things that you can purchase at your local supply store. The bigger challenge that we have is just regular cost inflation. Some of these technologies, for example, if you switch to heat pumps or heat pump hot water tanks, are still substantially more expensive than a comparable product. And the installation costs can be higher. Installation costs continue to rise as construction continues to get more expensive. And so that's balancing out, that increase in costs is balancing out some of the savings we're seeing as things do become more standardized. Question from Trevor, was a grant writer required to apply for grants at different levels of government, or is the process more streamlined at this point? That's a really good question. We've certainly used grant writers in the past. In this case, neither of these projects were funded with grant writers. It's something we've taken on internally. It's a skill set that we've built internally as a team. The application forms and application requirements for each of the highlighted grants are provided publicly. They're publicly available on the program websites, and you can reach out to the various levels of government or other grant providers for more details. Our experience has been, generally speaking, that the grant providers are pretty accommodating for questions and about their process and about their forms and intake. Give everyone a minute, see if there's any more questions before we close. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Oh, one more question from Trevor. Where do you recommend to start, small scale or large? Trevor, if it's your first retrofit, start small, one building, and build your processes from there before you attempt something large. Work with one small group of tenants on building a good process around communication, around systems, build your trade relationships before you attempt to scale. There's also a number of smaller grants for retrofitting something like fourplex or a duplex if you own smaller properties that you can take advantage of through the City of Edmonton and others that are more appropriate to that scale, and will allow you to do renovations that are a little bit smaller, or appliance upgrades or systems upgrades that are a little smaller and more conventional before taking on a larger project. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you attending. We're so excited about Housing Month this November, and we look forward to seeing many of you at upcoming presentations. If you have any other questions about retrofitting, lessons learned, or our projects, please feel free to reach out to me. And if you have more questions about Housing Month or like the schedule for upcoming webinars, it's available at housingmonth.ca. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.